Welcome to Season 2 of The Morning Glory Project. I'm your host, Betsy Graziani-Fassbender. And on this podcast, I bring to you guests of a lot of different kinds, survivors and thrivers, innovators and trailblazers, folks that have fallen down and gotten back up, folks that have been knocked down and gotten back up. Basically, I ask every single guest the same question. How did you get through what you got through? And the reason I ask that is because I think that when we share those stories, we gain empathy for those different than ourselves. We gain understanding from those whose circumstances may resemble our own. But we all get to walk away with a little notion of how we might get through whatever we're going through. I hope you enjoyed these stories and feel free to go to themorninggloryproject.com to find any past episodes or to listen to one again, and feel free to share us out with your friends and give us a review or a like. We sure do appreciate it. Thanks for listening. I'm really happy today to welcome to the Morning Glory Project Edward Doyle-Gillespie. Ed was on his way to an academic career teaching literature and history when his plans abruptly changed in the fall of 2001. Like so many people, the events of 9/11, which took place on what was his first day of graduate school, changed the course of Ed's life. Like everyone else, Ed watched it unfold and thought, okay, I'm going to get my master's degree, and then I'm going to earn a black belt, and I'm going to go and protect people from bad guys. Today, Ed is still teaching, but not at a university, and the subjects aren't great books or philosophy. He's an instructor at the Baltimore Police Academy, where he teaches officers about community policing, ethics, and counterterrorism. After 13 years, he's now a detective on the force, but when he started, he worked the streets as a beat cop. Being a black officer came with many assumptions and indeed stereotypes that Ed simply did not fit. Neither did he fit the stereotype of what many would presume a black man in a Baltimore police uniform might be. Neither fish nor fowl, Ed has chosen to learn, to grow, and to bring his own values and experiences to his work, which still fulfills that original mission of protecting people from bad guys. Ed has now published 2 books of poetry, Masala, Tea and Oranges, and on the latter edition of Sancho, Panza, and he continues to write outside of his day job at the Police Academy. Ed Doyle-Gillespie, thank you so much for being part of the Morning Glory Project today. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I think of you as I've read and watched a number of things about you and heard about you from our mutual dear friend. You are neither fish nor fowl. or you just don't seem to fit tidily into any of the boxes that people tend to put others into. Tell me about your life as a police officer and how you are the same as and different from your colleagues.
It's funny, neither fish nor fowl. Yeah, it's been fascinating from the very beginning, actually. I had, as we kind of did an inventory of everyone in the academy from where they came and why they were there. And when I said, well, before this, I was working at Johns Hopkins and I have my master's degree from there. There were a lot of raised eyebrows and some people asked whether I was here to write a book. Because we've had academics actually join the police department for the purpose of writing a book, and they stayed for a year or two. And I said, no, I want to be a cop. So there was always the question of, well, are you tough enough to fit in? Can you handle the streets? That sort of thing. You're a middle-class guy came from an academic background. So there was always that. There was always kind of the, Josh, you don't talk like a black guy from the street. So how are you going to get by? And, it's funny because it functioned in all sorts of different levels. I mean, there's the funny camaraderie of it of, hey, let's listen to how he pronounces this word to, I've actually encountered, cops and particularly a few supervisors I had that were actually quite hostile. I mean, really very angry that I was there.
How so? For why?
I represented a type of cognitive dissonance for them, for one thing, I think. I think lots of them felt very threatened. For some officers there, for some supervisors, being a cop and doing, cop stuff was their access to personal power. And I kind of represented a culture or a type of person or a set of practices that was always antithetical to their personal power. Um, and so, I mean, I've met some that, said I never liked school. I didn't like academic people. Like I had one that was very angry at me for reading. We had, I worked in one unit in which we had time, maybe about 20 minutes or so. We'd sit around while the other shift came in and we got organized and went out. And if I had time, downtime, I would read. And this supervisor, this sergeant, which became furious. I mean, he was just like, "Don't you bring no more books to work? Why you be bringing books to work?" He was just really, really angry about it.
Isn't it interesting? I'm a little stymied as we're talking because, there's lots of chatter about what people call reverse racism, which kind of really doesn't exist in lots of ways, which is racism against white people. But it sounds like in a way it was this not reverse, but kind of a twisted racism as if you, a black man and a cop, shouldn't be an intellectual, those were opposites somehow, or somehow menacing to or threatening to folks who saw it a different way than you.
So there was almost a type of Stockholm syndrome going on with some of the black officers that I knew, that they had very much given themselves over in part to some racial paradigms, some racist paradigms. And they were like, well, we don't do that. We aren't supposed to do that. Why are you? And men aren't supposed to read. Black men aren't supposed to read. And it's funny because I even remember having a conversation with a white officer who defined himself as being, as he said, "I'm a country boy. I'm a redneck. I'm a good old boy." He's like, "Why do the black guys give you such a hard time? You'd think they would like the fact that you went to school and you read and, you've worked hard in school and your family did well." Because my father was a PhD. And he said, "You'd think they would like that. I don't understand." So
what have you come to understand about that?
Well, here's the thing. And this is I guess, an answer that straddles the line of a lot of different dynamics going on when we look at policing. We have thousands of officers in this agency. And within the culture of policing, you have so many subcultures. And as much as I have found cops that were very threatened by, very disturbed by my propensity for reading and academia, and, as they put it, my somewhat nerdiness, I've met quite a few that were rather taken by it and said, ask me, "Hey, what are some good books I can read?" Or, "Could you tutor my kid?" Or, "I wish I'd done better in that." Or, "Hey, did you ever read this concept?" And, I actually had one supervisor who pulled me aside one day and he said, he kind of looked left and right, like we were in the Maquis, during the occupation of France. And he said, "I hear you like to read. I like to read too."
Wow. Like that's a big secret.
Exactly. And he was very much an alpha male cop, and he was a drug cop who did, he did busts, and he was, but it was like, he said, "I really love reading history." I said, "Oh, my first degree is in history." And so we talked about it. And so I think a lot of it has been, it's a matter of the company that you keep. It's like where you end up, where you find yourself. Like I work at the academy now, and we trade books back and forth a lot, and people respect. It's funny. There's a matter of, what can I learn from you? Or you're helping blaze a trail that we need to blaze.
Well, and let it not go unsaid that Baltimore itself, by reputation and fact I'm gathering, is not the easiest place in the world to be a cop of any color or any ilk.
Absolutely.
For that matter. It's a challenging city with lots of challenges to it. And it sounds as though, the dear Bard may have given us some guidance, all the world's a stage and all the people merely players. It sounds as though people get their assignment of role and they wear that uniform, literally and figuratively in this case, and they feel uncomfortable with somebody that doesn't fit the role precisely.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I think I've seen that. I mean, because there's a feeling of, look, can I trust you? I know I worked with a guy who said, he said to me, kind of after the fact sort of thing, we were talking, we were working in a unit together, kind of an elite unit where we were looking for drugs, guns, gangs. And he said, "Man, I hear you talking in the office, and I listen to hear the music you're listening to, and see you're always sitting there reading." And I thought, yeah, he's kind of a smart guy, but I wouldn't want him backing me up in a fight. He goes, then we got into a fight, and I saw how physical you were, and I saw how you could handle it. And he said, "Miss, I was wrong, man. But I mean, often when you're in an existential crisis, you look for kind of brass tacks baseline answers. How am I going to survive?" And I think lots of cops, their thing is when people start coming up with, here's something innovative and new for policing. Here's a concept you might need for policing. Their first thought is, will this keep me alive? Am I going to be able to survive and do the job?
Well, they have very real and immediate things to consider. So, can I trust you? Will you have my back? Can you also use the same physicality that I need to be safe? Those aren't unreasonable questions, for Pete's sake.
Right. And I've often found that when discussing police reform, discussing the Department of Police Officers and things like that, it's funny now, having been a teacher and worked in academics and now been a cop, I know people all over the spectrum of, left wing, right wing, left brain, right brain. And so I've talked to people from, my academic world who've said things like, well, maybe our cops shouldn't have guns like the cops in England. And, maybe they should, look at things this way. They should all do yoga every day. And like, yes, okay, some of those things sound good, but they're not really practical or really going to work. And I've got people on the right wing that, say if we all carried M60 machine guns, that, it would be a much safer city. But so obviously the truth has to lie somewhere in the middle. But I've had to counsel people, I realize, who come from that. They come from a world in which they haven't been through many existential crises. They don't understand the idea of the crime fight because they've been the victim of violent crime.
So you're saying in terms of the world of academia, the world of the middle and upper class world, perhaps have not faced the direct and immediate dangers that cops and also folks that are in different worlds experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about people that I've met in West Baltimore that live, they and the officers that patrol there live in this heightened state often because they are just in constant existential crisis. And, the good people that I've known throughout my life, who, like I did, I would never have known that is what life was like in, say, I grew up in Philadelphia. I grew up in an upper middle class part of Philadelphia. I went to a private school for 13 years. The same all boys private school for 13 years.
Well, no, wait now, before we go any further, that had to be a big screech of a dead stop then the first time you were on the street as a police officer.
Absolutely.
So tell me about that. Tell me about that shift from the upper middle class private school kid with academic parents to street cop in Baltimore. How'd you not get whiplash with that one?
So the funny, as you were asking me that, the first image that popped into my head, we went on field training. So that's when you're still in training status and you're out there with an experienced officer. And you're starting to learn how to do the job, how to take reports and how to approach things and, the myriad of things you have to do. And I just remember being, first of all, in a public housing development, which is something, as we called it growing up, the projects that were in those neighborhoods. And,
right.
A place that into which I would never venture. If we did drive through North Philadelphia, where some of those houses were, we, roll up the windows and, that was a different world. So we were driving through with my field training officer, and he flashed a light behind one of the buildings and pulled up. And there was a woman standing by a wall, kind of backed up against the wall. And he yelled, Mary, what are you doing? You know better than that. And I realized she was defecating. I just kind of sat there with my mouth hanging open. Like I said, is she going to? He goes, yeah, she's doing it again. Come on. So we got out of the car and I'm talking to this woman. And of course, my first thought was, well, I have to rationalize what's going on here. I have to understand why I'm seeing a person defecating on a wall. So that just, she was a drug addict. She'd had 9 children. It was just a whole different world. So my first thought was, well, I have to organize this. Now, and I think, as much as I did this from my, my middle class, upper class, college educated background, I think lots of people try to do this. They look at behavior that just makes no sense. And well, I have to organize this so that it makes sense in my world. So for lots of people, it becomes, well, she is just evil. This woman is just wrong. She is wrong. She's made terrible decisions out of malice and she deserves what she gets. And over time, I've come to understand this woman was probably suffering from horrendous mental illness, drug
Hmm.
addiction, health problems. But it,
Poverty.
oh yeah, oh, probably so. Yeah. I mean, um, and so adding depth to, and this, and I think this kind of swings me around to what I do now when I teach. I teach classes on bias. I teach classes on, I teach class on bias, on Baltimore history. I teach even a class on cross culturalism where I talk about semiotics. Trying to understand that there's some depth, there's a little bit more depth to this awful thing that we're seeing, this dysfunctional thing that we're seeing, it doesn't connect with us, than we understand.
Do you think it's that we reach for the simple label because I don't know. I hate this word because it sounds judgmental, but it's almost a little lazy to to just quickly categorize that way. I've often felt as I watch the civil discord that we're in right now, even the political discord that we're in, that's so shocking and horrible, and we're all just white knuckling it until things find some kind of homeostasis again. I wonder if it just is that we just quickly need to sort things. Like you said, I need to organize this, but that what we're missing is nuance.
Oh, of
What we're
course.
missing is we want the no pun intended, the black and the white of it.
Mhm.
We want yes or we want no. We want bad or good or evil or terrible. We want just a simple explanation, or people want that, but that it seldom is that. It seems like.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had a conversation about, about the kneeling football players, the practice of kneeling football players. And, I had to qualify, first of all, I think I've seen two football games in my life. And
So you didn't come at this from a sports fan kind of an angle.
exactly, exactly. And so the semiotics of it really didn't hold with me. I don't really understand what it's all supposed to be. And I even said, I said, when was it? And I didn't mean this to be sarcastic. I was like, was it decided at some point that your feelings about all the veterans and fighting people of the United States forevermore is encapsulated in this one gesture? I mean, was there some decision that was there some semiotic decision that was made at some point that everyone bought into? So when this person kneels, it is clearly going against that decision. And I said, really, why do we think that? Why do we even play it then? But I also said, when someone says, no, that's not why I'm kneeling, this is why I'm kneeling, why is there any more debate at that point? I mean, it's like, I'm secretly dishonoring the troops. Like, they seem pretty open about why they're kneeling. And is it a debate that it's okay to have? And, when people have said, well, that's not a time for politics. Oh, well, then if it's not a time for politics, they ought not play the anthem. I mean, it was like, and once again, I had no,
You have no dog in this fight in terms of the football itself, but in terms of the imagery and the right to do what Colin Kaepernick and others have done was the discussion you wanted to have.
right. I was like, well, why is it, do we learn more and grow more and is to become stronger if we say, okay, my impulse is to simply say, you are doing this because you are an archetype of evil and I can therefore stand against it. The world is binary and the conversation is done. Or is it you're possibly a relatively virtuous person who is making a statement that I don't really fully understand? So even though I might not agree with you, I mean, I think it's really noteworthy that the guy who gave Colin Kaepernick the idea of kneeling was a former Green Beret. Because Kaepernick had been sitting out. And once again, there's no image of this for me. I don't watch football, but I don't even really understand it. But
He first started by sitting, then he chose to kneel. That was his way of both being respectful to the ritual, but also to protest police violence toward Black people.
right. And I said there was a coworker of mine who was irate over it, just irate. And I said, you do realize that he got this idea from a former Green Beret who said, he said, I take umbrage at you sitting. I feel this is meant to honor my comrades. And Kaepernick said, well, I don't dishonor your comrades. This is why I'm doing it. And so he said, well, what if you knelt? Because we kneel when we lose a comrade. And he said, oh, okay. And so I gave him this whole narrative. And I said, well, so here's how it comes. We get to this point. And I could see this guy kind of glaze over. It was too much information because at the end of the day, he wanted to hate Colin Kaepernick for not standing. And you don't want the world to get too complicated. And one thing I found, when I first got out there on the street, I really was looking for an uncomplicated world. I wanted to get bad guys. And pretty soon I started realizing that I was using that moniker for just about anyone that wasn't living in a way that I thought was appropriate.
Wait. I want to slow that down a little bit because I think that's really important. Because that moment at 9/11, you said, I'm going to go get strong. I'm going to go protect the world from bad guys. That's a virtuous kind of thing, but it seems naive in some
Sure,
ways. Yes.
absolutely.
But so it sounds like you kind of got it that your own binary sorting of the world into good guys and bad guys was arbitrary according to you,
Sure.
right? So we all have to expand that consciousness. What do you think is the hardest part for you? What are the most difficult things for you to deal with as both a peace officer and as I'm thinking of you, that you've heard the expression of square peg in a round hole. Well, I think there's a whole bunch of round holes and square holes, and you're a triangle. You don't really fit into either of them. And I'm wondering if it's hard to be that triangle, and if it's hard to be a cop, it's hard to be a black man in America right now. Maybe it always has been, of course, always has been, but that it's also difficult to be this triangle person.
I think I think that's the thing. I think it's funny. I remember that quote and why I know why the cage bird sings when Maya Angelou says to her mother, and when Maya Angelou's mother says to her, "Don't take it personally. It's not about you personally. They just hate us as a group." And I remember reading that. I was maybe like in the eighth grade and thinking, well, I'd rather have you hate me as an individual. And so I think when I've reread Gloria Anzaldúa, this bridge called my back, and there's a essay in which she says, when I identify as a Raza person, my black and Asian sisters want me to identify to take on all the third world causes, and when I identify as a lesbian, um, I'm asked by I'm asked by heterosexuals to be this and by bisexual people to be that. And it's like whatever identity you have, there's going to be a counterbalancing force pulling. And so being that triangle, I think, you have to learn to kind of glory in it ultimately.
Hmm.
You have to learn to kind of glory in it and say, I really, these are my foibles and these are my fortes, and this is the package that I'm given instead of struggling against it, you know.
So what tell me a part that was really what was the hard part of coming to know that? Because that sounds like the end of the story. That,
Mhm.
I always ask people on this, how did you get through what you got through? And it sounds like embracing your own your own diversity of being diverse within being diverse,
Right.
and welcoming that. But what made the challenge? So what were the rough parts?
I think when people realize that, to some extent, you have to realize, and those around you have to realize that when you are that person, you're willing to go without a community to some extent. Um, that, like the guys, I've known some officers that said, you need to come out and drink heavily with us. And I said, I don't do that, guys. I've had people even say, you need to train your speech so that you don't make other people feel inferior.
So that you don't sound as erudite?
Exactly. And I said, I'm just going to have to go without you then. I'm just going to have to go without you.
Where do you get that, Ed? Where do you get that? Because I think that most of us, even if we are triangles in a square and round peg holed world, I think most of us want to go along to get along, or get along to go along. I'm not sure what the expression is. What in you told you that said, no, I do not need to do that? Where'd you get that?
So I've pondered that because I know sometimes it's one of those things that people which they will look and see it as a virtue, and others it becomes it can be quite annoying to them. But I think one thing is that I'm an only child. I think because I spent a lot of time reading. I spent a lot of time reading stories about heroism, I think, and there's always the question of the individual standing up. I mean, it was kind of a very simplistic things that were put forward in. My mom was big into Greek mythology, um, so I think a lot of the source material, I guess you could say, that kind of makes up who I am, caused it. I think also living when I have tried. I think we've all, like you said, we've all gone through that period of, oh well, let me just do what I need to do here. I think I've often looked at that there's been an issue, some counterbalancing issue that, like, it created. Like, yes, I did what I had to do to get along here, but now this was an issue that it caused. I think at the end of the day, you weigh it and say, what was the cost here? Did I give up my morals? Did I give up my individuality? Even did I give up my time? Did I spend time doing something that wasn't meaningful to me?
You know what? I've thought about that a lot, even in my own life, Ed, because looking back, this is much history now. I'm, longer in the tooth these days and have grown children and all of that. But in my younger dating days, I can remember sort of acquiescing to the expectations of men in terms of how I should look or dress or what I should wear. And that sounds like such a simple thing, but I think about it now and I think, why was I wearing high heels? I didn't like wearing them. They were miserably uncomfortable. I ended up with foot surgery. Why was I doing that? Even something as simple as that, adapting what we wear, not of course a uniform, which is a different matter altogether, but looking back and seeing that it cost me health, but mostly what it cost was that I knew I was reshaping myself for somebody else. And that had secret little costs that played out over time for a long time.
See, yes, see, that's the thing. You kind of we often like give ourselves this death of a thousand cuts, where we keep saying, where do I acquiesce? Where do I acquiesce? And this is where a lot of police malfeasance comes from, I think.
Hmm.
Or an
Say more.
officer.
What do you mean about that?
Oh well, it's if an officer falls in with a group of officers, or the question is, how will I be accepted by this unit, by that officer, by this officer? And it turns out that this officer is not on the straight and narrow. Well, just cut this corner here, just cut that corner there. We all do that. Why don't you just do this? Um, and I think the average officer, and this is not being Pollyannish, I really think the average officer, and I train them, comes in with very virtuous ideas about how they want to be, how they want to police. And we talk about this type of thing that will, young officers will see someone do something and they'll say, is that okay for us to do that? Oh, sure, kid. Don't, gee,
Hmm.
I'm allowed to question that. Am I allowed to go against that? And, it's funny. I had a great professor at George Washington University for an American history course, who was talking about slavery and about the psychological effects and social effects of slavery. And if I'm sure you'll remember, as I do, as some, those of us that are a bit longer in the tooth, in the 1970s when Roots came out, the very powerful scene where LeVar Burton's character was made to say his slave name.
Right. He kept defying that.
Right, until he nearly died, and he finally said Toby, which was his
Hmm.
assigned to him by his master. And this professor said, that moment said a lot. That's the subordination of the individual. That's a totalitarian system, and he said, so he says, ask yourself how many times you say Toby, how many times because of what you wear or what you do, or you decide, I'm going to subordinate myself to this overarching dynamic.
Hmm. How many times do we all say Toby?
Right.
Squeezing our feet into shoes that hurt our bodies, or having facial surgery to please some, injecting things into our face to make ourselves look a certain way. That's on the feminine, but also in your line of work, it could be folks that acquiesce to less than ethical or even violent or dangerous things.
Absolutely.
I'd be remiss if I end our conversation without asking you, of course, about the Black Lives Matter movement and the challenges that police officers have faced. And yeah, I'm not going to address, of course, somebody doing violent harm to somebody intentionally. That's a whole nother matter. But I'm wondering what it's like to be a good cop right now. It seems like bad cops make good cops' jobs really hard.
They do. They make them really hard. And I've I will do a quick scan in the mornings to see if what videos are up, what body cam footage is up, and I've been just driven to distraction. I mean, my office mate and I looked at one the other day, and she was practically in tears. She's like, "What is wrong with people? Like, we will see things that cops will do in other jurisdictions or even ours, and think, what was he thinking? Like, what And it's not about consequentialist ethics, like, oh my gosh, don't they're looking at us, don't do the wrong thing. It's a matter of did you really think as a cop, kind of that Nuremberg attitude of, did you really think that this was your job, that doing this makes sense? On the other hand, there are times when I still, I have to look at some of these situations, look at things that come up, and say, well, what should this officer have done? And in many cases, there are things that are ugly, things that the public doesn't want to see, but they are part of how we have to do the job at times.
Mm-hmm.
They might involve violence, and they might involve
more force than one would be comfortable watching.
Right. I mean, I've talked with people from my Johns Hopkins world about force that I've used, and I think the conversation was actually traumatizing for them. They were like, but because I actually had one woman say to me once, she said, well, I said, I told her I've never shot anyone. I said, I've had more close combat, hand to hand, having to control people and fist fight with them and things like that. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, we fight. We have to fight with people sometimes. And she looked genuinely confused. And she said, well, why? Like, what starts the fight? I don't get it. I mean, she really did not understand. It's just not part of her purview. It's just not part of her.
I wonder how many of us, just because of unfamiliarity, we just can't recognize something we haven't experienced ourselves. And it's my bias, and it's a whole reason why I do this podcast, is that I think that it's by telling these stories that we enlighten each other, that we broaden each other's perspectives. And it seems to me that you as this triangle that you are, you bring a number of different, completely disparate viewpoints together into one experience. The street life, the cop life, the academic life, and I understand you're a dad.
Yes.
So teaching your children to be not Toby.
Right.
I wonder how that is for you.
And it's funny, as you were talking about the Western cosmetic foot binding you experienced.
Right.
News.
It's so funny that you say that. I've called it exactly that.
It's just the first thing that popped into my head. And men are very rarely asked to deform or mutilate themselves to be considered acceptable. And I'm raising a girl, and it's a challenge. I mean, it really is. I remember sitting here. I was sitting writing, and when the 2016 campaigns were going on, and that statement that Trump made, that was audio taped.
The Access Hollywood tape.
Yeah, and that, and then so much else, and so here's my bias, my male privilege, that if you were to ask me, is there sexism? Yes. Is there misogyny? Yes. Okay. But to suddenly feel this avalanche of, oh my gosh, there's a whole segment of society that just hates my daughter, just wants to mutilate and destroy and crush my daughter. And how can I protect her? And how can I fortify her against this? Feeling like and this is something I've written about, feeling like I have to weaponize my daughter to go into the world, and not from
protect her.
Right, and not from the the marginalized people that I've dealt with, the criminals, and okay, I understand they're out there that I've dealt with, but that there are people in positions of power, people in positions of respectability,
her future bosses or teachers or scout leaders or
right.
neighbors.
I just remember feeling the weight of it, and I'm writing a science fiction story as a gift for her, and I was writing it kind of half-heartedly because I was thinking, at first I said, I want her to have a story with strong female role models, strong female archetypes. I thought, well, she'll have the Hunger Games. There'll be so much stuff that's out. She's not want to read Dad's story. And then I literally said out loud, sitting in my living room with the computer on my lap, I just heard myself say, grab her by the what?
Right.
And my mouth just fell open. And I thought, oh my gosh, how have I missed this?
Well, confessedly, I have to tell you, I too, so I'm a Caucasian female and currently a middle class, though I grew up in kind of a upper lower class family. And I've never thought that we were in a post-racial society by any means. I certainly knew that we weren't in a post-misogynistic society by any means. But I have to say that what's been revealed by the glaring neon ugly light that we have in our world right now is at a much more shocking level than I thought. I thought we were further along. I didn't think the isms were gone,
Right.
but I really did think we were further along than we are. And that alone tells you that I have a privilege in looking at that, because I say, when I've said that to African-American friends of mine, they say, well, we didn't think it was any further along.
Right.
So it's like, oh, yeah, now I'm getting it. And my husband didn't realize the degree of sexism until the Me Too world. And I started itemizing for him, the many, 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 many incidents that I've faced that are Me Too-ish or Me Too directly.
Right.
So we all get educated. So Ed, just in closing, I want to talk to you for about 6 hours about this, but but I'm wondering what gets you through each day? What keeps you going?
Part of it is I have really made it a point to be in a place that, I wanted to be in police work, and the mission has only expanded for me now. I went from that binary sense of doing good versus evil to doing good for the institution, doing good in the world. So first of all, it's a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning and purpose. One of my biggest fears was to get to my later years and say, you know what, I don't care about what I did. I care about what I do. So that's one thing. I think having a family, of course. Being connected with other people, and I'm an introvert. I don't connect well with people. But definitely those things give me meaning. My writing continues to, but I have to say a big thing is being able to say, this is important work. That mutual friend of ours said, this is heart work that you're doing. And that's important to me.
Well, thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you also for this beautiful time. I have a feeling, I have a hope that we'll have future conversations, Ed, and that perhaps when we can meet in the molecular world again, perhaps we'll be able to meet in that way as well. Thank you so much for your time today.
Certainly. Thank you.
As I reflect on my conversation with Edward Doyle-Gillespie, I come away with one really big feeling, and that's the feeling of humility. With all of the civil rights activity and civil unrest that we're witnessing now with the Black Lives Matter movement, while I, as a Caucasian woman, might have great empathy for that, great passion for the ideals of justice and fairness, I have to be humble and say, all I can do is imagine what it might be like not to wear the skin that I wear. And I see Ed as somebody who crosses all kinds of boundaries in interesting ways. He's a paradox or a series of ironies, and he's often misjudged by various groups for various wrong reasons. He's clearly an individual with his own individual path. So I want to be careful not to presume that I understand, but to try to. That's the precipice that we must live on, right? When we're trying to understand people whose circumstances are wildly different from our own. I can't understand, and I have to humbly admit that. It's presumptuous of me to think that I do, and I want to strive to try to. That's really the whole reason that I do this podcast, is to try to gain understanding through the stories of others, to be open-hearted and trying to be humble, not thinking that I know what it's like. I really only have my best guess. So I want to listen to lots of different kinds of people from lots of different kinds of realities and backgrounds and experiences and qualities and choices, lifestyles. I want to hear from them all and try to understand. That's my extra bloom for today. It's empathy. It's humility. It's open-heartedness. Something that I strive toward, and I have to fight against my assumptions, my pride, my bigotries. It's a slog, but it's worth making. Thanks so much for listening today to the Morning Glory Project. As always, it's an honor to have even a moment of your time when there are so many ways that you can be spending it. Thanks for spending it here. I hope that you are finding a way in your world to grow and to bloom.